YouTube, today we're in Job 29, 30, 31. Join me in being a daily Bible reader, getting God's Word. We'll be in the Psalms real soon. Like, subscribe, and share if this has been a blessing to you. Job 29. 29, Job starts out reminiscing the days of old when things were better. Verse 2, I long for the years gone by when God took care of me. Verse 5, the Almighty was still with me. See, God hadn't left him at this point, but during that way of thinking in the ancient Near East, in Job's time, again around likely the time of Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, that was the thought process. Either God was with you, being favor upon your life, or God was against you because you were wicked, and that isn't the truth. We get to see the entire biblical perspective. We get to see Job's full perspective. He didn't know about the meeting between God and Satan, but we do. We get that glimpse, that perspective. He talks about the things he had, how people respected him. Verse 11, all who heard me praised me. He talks about all the help he gave to widows, orphans, how he sought justice for others, etc. In verse 18 he says, I thought I would surely die surrounded by family after a good long life. See, Job didn't know what tomorrow held for him, and neither do we. So while we wait, while we're there, in the good and the bad, in the peaks and in the valleys, we praise and we worship God. That's where he started. In chapter 1 there, everything was taken away from him. He bowed down and he worshiped. Job 30 starts off with, but now. So you know how this is going to go. But now, and we get into that. But now, I'm mocked by the younger, whose fathers weren't even worthy of running with my sheepdogs, whatever that means, he says. But you can imagine that's pretty lowly. Their fathers are pretty lowly, so they're even lower than that. But he's mocked by those people. They spit in my face. God has humbled me. But now, they lay traps in my path. They block my road. They do everything they can to destroy me. They jump on me when I'm down. You ever had that happen in your life? People just, crushing you while you're down. Depression haunts my days. My bones are filled with pain, etc., etc. He goes on about this. Verse 20, he goes, I cry out to you, O God, but you do not answer me. That's not entirely true. Again, Job doesn't have the full perspective of the Bible, the cross, the story of redemption, of grace and mercy. He doesn't fully get all that we have. We are blessed to live with what we have. So that's why get into God's Word. Understand redemption. Understand grace and mercy and what Jesus did on the cross for you and for me. Prayers aren't... God would be a genie in a bottle if he just answered your prayers the way you wanted them answered. And Garth Brooks said it best. I thank God for unanswered prayers. God answers prayers sometimes yes, sometimes no, and sometimes it's wait. And that's where Job is right now. Persistent prayer. Jesus talks about the woman who went before the judge, who was not a godly judge, but she went to him persistently, begging for justice, and he eventually gave it to her out of persistence. So while we're waiting on God to act, and again, God may not act the way you think he should act, God's going to act according to his will and his greater purpose. That may mean suffering for you for a time, or for a lengthy time, or for a lifetime. But it's going to be according to his good will and his purpose. He's a just God. But while we're waiting, we praise. We worship. We don't walla. Or if you're from the South, waller in it. We don't do that. We worship. Job didn't know how this was all going to turn out, and neither do you and I. So I encourage you to pray, to worship, to praise, to be thankful, to count your blessings. Chapter 31, Job continues in his innocence. He's continued to give an account. Verse 1, I have made a covenant with my eyes not to look with lust at a young woman. He goes on, have I lied to anyone? He's proclaiming his innocence. And again, he is not saying he's perfectly sinless. Only Jesus was ever perfectly sinless. But his sins did not weigh according to what he was getting out of life. It's not always fair. That's not the way it happens, but that's the way of the thought of the ancient Near East. That's the thought process of that time. Verse 6, let God weigh me on the scales of justice. All right, that's their thought. That was Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar's thought. That's somewhat of Job's thought. But we, again, have the story, the whole story of the Bible. We know that the Old Testament, all these things that happen in the Old Testament point to Jesus. All the things that happen in the New Testament point back to Jesus and the cross. All right, then he goes into several if-then statements. We've heard if-then statements from God in the past. Now we're hearing Job's if-then statement. If I have strayed from his path, if I have lusted with my eyes, if I'm guilty of any other sin, then, so if this is taking place, then let my crops be eaten, let my wife be with another. And he goes on to, have I been, which is also an if statement, have I been unfair to servants? Have I been unfair to the poor, to the widowed, to the orphans? Have I trusted in money? Have I worshipped the sun, the moon, the stars, any of that stuff? Then let my arm be torn from its socket, for that would be much better than facing God's judgment. Verse 35, let the Almighty answer me. And that's what we'll see in the days to come, that God will speak after some other knucklehead jumps up and speaks. Tomorrow we'll see him. God will speak before we reach chapter 42 in the end of Job. Read ahead so that we can learn something together. Job finishes off with more if-then statements. But I pray that you will move forward. You have the whole Bible perspective, that you will pray and praise and worship during your times of suffering, because we don't always exist on the mountaintops. We don't always exist in the valleys. My dad once said, no matter how good life gets, it will always get worse. And no matter how bad life gets, it'll always be better. Job is experiencing this. God bless you. Be a daily Bible reader. Like, subscribe, and share if this has been a blessing to you.